So the business scenarios in between Workfront and Oracle or Eloqua in this scenario, there's several core ones. Often it's review and approve. Now that may be around content, around assets that you want to have approved as part of a project before they're entered into a campaign. A kind of power use case is attribution, and what we mean by that is, once a campaign's run, where's the value been created and what activities were created or what activities contributed to the creation of that value. Things that are very germane, like what did you get for the value of your media spend inside a campaign that may be monitored or managed inside of Workfront from a dollar perspective and people who used it, but actually is distributed through Eloqua. And then of course just keeping things created and synchronized and so on. We're going to focus on just probably two of these scenarios today, really around attribution and automation. Automation is it's not obvious, but it's actually pretty cool when you kind of understand what the potential is here. And equally, attribution, we'll get into kind of describing how that works in just a moment. So the use case is kind of at a high level is imagine a scenario, and probably not everyone who's attending here today is a marketing automation expert or maybe even not even a Workfront expert. What an application like Eloqua does is essentially creates digital campaigns that are focused on engagement. We receive these things every day in our inbox and through our text messages and see the effects online and websites and so forth. Those things are generally configured and driven manually and set up manually. Now, in parallel, the project that's used to run those is set up inside of Workfront. And so what Put It Forward does is bring those two things together so that, when tasks are, when a task is hit or a task is approached and start to be executed inside of a project plan in Workfront, it turns that into and spawns that into a series of activities and actions and events that are automatically created and run inside of Eloqua. So let's kind of walk through one of these scenarios here. And so the touch points really in between these two things are projects on one side, and very differently on the other side is a campaign. And inside the project you have your tasks and events and so forth, and inside the campaign you have the events and actions and assets. So inside Workfront, marketing person comes along, perhaps an operations person or not an operations person, but maybe a marketing manager. Comes along and decides to create a new project in Workfront. And maybe that new project is we're going to have a webinar, just probably like the one that was created for the one that we're in today. So going into that webinar, there's a lot of activities. And so the next person comes along and says, okay, I'm going to scope out the activities here. I've got to get some media. I've got to do some promotional work. I've got to run some emails that go out. I actually have to organize the webinar, I have to select the audience, put the content in it, and so forth. And then after the webinar is over, I have to do counting things and see how many people attended and really sort of wrap that up at the end of it. So once those activities and tasks are added to a project inside of Workfront, again, Put It Forward senses through its rules and through the business criteria and the data mappings that are in place. What are the activities that are relevant to the creation or the creation of the campaign or the objects inside of Eloqua. The rules go, and based on that data, the PIF business rules, create those campaigns based on the template that exists inside of Workfront. That template then, that campaign then is then used by the marketing operations team to start, designing and affecting the overall campaign, selecting their audience, who is actually going to be engaged, how they're going to be engaged, what's going to be driving it, when, and so forth. Now you may have a marketing person update, the program inside of Workfront, the project inside of Workfront. And again, that update flows through Put It Forward based on, kind of business rules and criteria, and updates the steps inside of the campaign in Eloqua. Now, at the end of that, the campaign data is driven back. The campaign executes, the webinar runs, what have you. And that campaign data is then driven back into Workfront. Now, that campaign data contains things like, how many people attended, what was the average duration, what was the activity that was created out of that, how many people clicked, how many people stayed around the whole time, how many people, landed on the web page but didn't register, and all that kind of information that's, you would associate with, the execution of a marketing campaign. Now that data becomes empirical inside of Workfront, where you can start to measure. So you say, well, I had a project that had 10 steps and had 200 hours of activity that was associated with it, involved these resources, and at the end of it, I was able to generate this level of activity and against all of that. So you can link those two things together and attribute that value in between those two scenarios. Now, often it's also connected into a CRM system or finance system or some other type of operational system where you are going to be measuring, what's happened on the revenue side, on the customer side, and bringing those things together so you get a true picture of attribution, and maybe then driving budget for new campaigns or new marketing activity and so forth. But simply, at the very first step, you start with the automation of campaign creation and so forth, and then you move on to the media components and the review and approve of assets and the digital asset management integration, and then perhaps maybe the proofing, where you bring in something like a Proof HQ to be able to be part of that story as well. Now, the recommendations that I would suggest for this, just out of our kind of perspective on these things, is choose choose a project type or an event type, that has a high frequency. So something that you do often so that you can see, a material return on these types of things. And again, choose the value. I spoke about this a moment ago. Choose the values that you actually want to attribute to. The synchronization, and keep this in mind, is it's not a complete bidirectional synchronization. Yes, data is flowing bidirectionally in between them, but it's often different data that's going in each direction. So, kind of think about that. And again, is keep the, I'd say like the non-campaign data, inside of, example like as I said, costing and budgeting and so forth, inside Workfront. That's a natural home for it. There's not really a need or a place you could wedge it into, into an application like Eloqua. But there's really not a need for that as well. And again, keep the assets inside of the marketing system. So whether those are images or PDFs or videos or whatever it is that you may be looking at, keep those there. No need to replicate that into Workfront. Final poll question here. Kind of after seeing those integration scenarios and thinking about sort of what we're looking at here today is look at what are the types of systems that you'd be thinking about integrating next, or would most benefit from integrating with Workfront. Often we have, as we said at the beginning, we have a starting point. We think about connecting CRM or IT together into Workfront, but then sometimes we have to get exposed to other areas that we may want to connect to. Well, thank you for taking the time to click through that here. We'll just begin to start kind of wrapping this up here and get on to some of the questions in the time that we have left. Now, I just want to share a couple, I'd say pro tips with you. And this is from the perspective of literally being through this, hundreds of times, not just with Workfront, but with other systems as well, around sort of at least the put it forward technology. And this applies to any integration, scenario that you work with. Draw pictures. The one on the left there is actually a real life scenario. It's from a customer of ours, jointly, a global consulting firm. They're very good at drawing pictures, consultants, but it takes time to understand the process map. And the reason is that that process map turns into something inside of Workfront, right? And that's really what will help you drive a lot of value out of Workfront. It's a great application, and if you can leverage kind of the cross-functional and cross-departmental processes, with it, you'll get a lot more value out of it, and not just keep it compartmentalized, perhaps in your business unit or in a smaller area inside of Workfront. Now we turn that into really the work orchestration. How does that manage and relate to all the other different systems that you may connect to, whether that's work management like Workfront or marketing or CRM and so forth, all the way through the service. You can manage that component of that. And the second pro tip, we'll say this here as well, is start with a project plan. If you don't have one, we certainly do. We're happy to share that with you. We have a fast start project plan. This is what literally every one of our customers gets, and when we assign them someone to work with, they're literally working off this template. It's industrialized. It's certainly scalable up to many types of integrations, but it's also granular enough and simplistic enough that you can start with and just do kind of your straightforward Jira to Workfront, or NetSuite to Workfront, or Eloqua to Workfront, and so forth. And again, organize for success. These are one of the things that we look for. Walking into these things is making sure that all the right people are there. We'll help you identify kind of what resources, what you need, and be able to leverage Workfront. Very good relationship with them, and they will help you get the people that you need, and the technology and the resources you need from your team as well. So I think we're kind of wrapping up here, and we can probably jump into the questions. If you want to get some more information, certainly just go to putitforward.com/workfront, or email me directly if you like. We'll get you the right people on our team connected to, and of course just use our generic one as well. So I open this back up to Jordan, and were there the questions that we'd like to take on in the kind of the few minutes or last? I guess we have 10 minutes left or so that we can spend time on.
Okay, great. I have some questions here. But first I want to say that I love the pro tips. Thanks so much. And also, if you look in your resources box, there should be some resources that you can look at that show how Put It Forward helps you seamlessly integrate with a couple of programs, as well as the Put It Forward website. So if you are looking for a way to get there easily, you can just click on those, and you should get there. So that's the audience. But for Mark, here we go. Here's some questions.
Right.
So this one is referencing something that was at the more towards the beginning of the presentation. It says, in the example, does the info also flow from Workfront to NetSuite? For example, resource cost info, projected cost escalation, and such.
I'm sorry, Jordan. I think I missed the end of your question there.
Oh, okay. That's fine. Let me read it again. In the example, does the info or the information also flow from Workfront to NetSuite? For example,
yes.
The resource cost info, the projected cost. Okay.
Yeah, and indeed it does. Just for the purposes of the conversation at the beginning there, and to make it simple, I just kind of read left to right. And equally, it is meant to be bidirectional and asynchronous, so the information flows in both directions. It's not often I wouldn't say it's not always the same information. I'll qualify that. You don't necessarily have you don't have kind of core financial data moving back down into into Workfront. For example, you may not do if you're running billing out of a project data that's come into NetSuite. You may not have kind of line item billing detail flowing back into Workfront, but you may you certainly would send kind of allocated budget resources and time, and maybe some contractual requirements that come along with that. And equally, if it's again, say it's a finance or billing scenario, you may not be sending kind of low-level task information from Workfront over into NetSuite. You may be just sending this activity, or kind of this sub-project, or this group of tasks took X amount of hours, and here's what the the billable rate is on that, and let NetSuite do the calculation and so forth.
Okay, great.
Good
That's
question.
an awesome answer. Thanks so much. Okay, next question is referring to the ability to use Put It Forward to connect to custom forms and fields in Workfront. Are custom field connectors enabled, or is it only to the pre-existing default Workfront fields?
No, good question. It's to any field. So it's standard objects, custom fields on standard objects, and then custom objects in the fields that are associated with that. So it's pretty much everything.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
Next question.
And that applies to any application, not just Workfront, by the way.
Oh, awesome. Okay, cool. Thanks. This is a two-part question. It says, we are interested in a few integrations, but wondering what is a realistic expectation of implementation for integrations, and how many should we tackle at once to effectively determine our processes and touch points needed?
We always kind of like to, start simplistically and start with one. Often, and so I'll just sort of, describe what we see as a behavior is that 75% of our projects are done in, 30 days or less. That doesn't mean 30 days of effort. That's just 30 days of calendar time. The other 25% are 60 days or less. Often, though, you start with one, you get it complete, and people kind of move up to 5, 6, 7 different types of scenarios, and that's kind of the standard pattern for consuming and put forward integration around Workfront.
Awesome, perfect, thanks. Next question: does the project have to start in Jira, or can the project begin in Workfront?
Yeah, absolutely. Another good question. It can equally begin in Workfront. I just, again, was sort of reading left to right there. It's not uncommon. Now, from a best practice perspective, you kind of have to think about what it is you're creating, and this applies to whether you start a project in Jira or you start it in Workfront. So if you are, defining what a project is in one environment, you're essentially creating the shell, inside of the other environment. But leaving the task allocation, the resource allocation up to whoever the project manager is in either environment or either system. So yeah, absolutely, it's completely reasonable to start a project inside of Workfront, and have that spawn into Jira, and vice versa too. But it's not uncommon that it goes either way.
Okay, perfect answer. Thanks so much. Here's the next one. Would it be possible to integrate ServiceNow with Jira and Workfront with ServiceNow?
Yes, absolutely. That's not terribly uncommon, believe it or not. And it's not just ServiceNow. I mean, sometimes it's, Oracle Service Cloud or Salesforce Service Cloud. Those are kind of, I'd say, the three dominant ones. And ServiceNow, certainly, are probably the three dominant ones, but ServiceNow in the lead, yeah.
Okay, great. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
This one says, what are the requirements for integration with SAP?
It depends which SAP, because it could equally be C4C or Hybris or ERP or HR or what have you. The requirements aren't any different than any other system that we're looking at. It kind of depends on the scenario and the technology being used. I know that's a bit of a vague answer, but SAP has a number of different systems that are out there, so it kind of depends. But from a process perspective, we start the same way. We identify the business process that's going to be affected. We identify the data elements that are required in each system. Then the rules that are applied on top of that, and the governance and data quality checks, the frequency, of the information that needs to go back and forth, whether that's real time or once a minute, once an hour type of thing. So it's a similar process. Yeah.
The person who asked that question just clarified that they mean SAP ERP.
ERP? Yeah. So if it's ERP, it's probably on the financial side. So it's not. It's very similar to kind of what we described as NetSuite, and I just picked NetSuite as a common frame of reference out there. So if it's finances, then it's going into the essentially into GL, and getting the information there and pumping it back. It also depends if you're using budget and forecasting in SAP, and what modules you're using too. But from a process perspective, it's identical.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Okay. We have time for one more question probably, and this is the question. I want to integrate Workfront and SAP leveraging Workfront workflow, collect master data required to set up a customer in SAP. Once collected and updated in SAP, can I use put it forward for this? If so, could put it forward develop the required Workfront objects for this process/project?
So the short answer is yes. We certainly can use put it forward to generate those objects. I'd say a fairly common scenario where you're using Workfront as the frontline application where you're capturing the customer data. You've onboarding a new customer, whatever mechanism that information is coming to you in. You create the project, you create the customer profile, and that's used to as a syndication and to push over into SAP. Now SAP is has a lot of nuance to that, and so inside SAP, what we do is we typically run against the business rules and business processes that they have defined there, and it triggers their own internal workflows for creating a new account or a new customer, and so forth. Now, not to bore everyone with SAP here, but they have a concept of business objects, right, and business partners, and the business partners there kind of are interdependent on one another. So often you have to affect both of them when you're integrating with Workfront. So hope that answered your question, whoever that was asking. It's a deeper context, and it's a deeper conversation. And I'm happy to carry that on after the fact too.
Awesome. Yeah, for sure. So if anyone has questions that they need follow-up or whatever, you can see here that Mark has put his personal email address on there, so he's happy to answer any questions that people have. Unfortunately, this is all the time that we have, but what I want to remind people is that after this, a survey will pop up, and we would really enjoy it and appreciate it if you would answer that survey for us. I know we can't force you, but it would really help us out. Also, I want to thank Mark for doing this for us today and presenting. We really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for coming out, and we hope to see you next time.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, everyone, for your time and attention. It's quite meaningful. Thank you.
Yep, thank you so much. Bye-bye.